Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope you're having a great night. We have a thunderstorm brewing, so hopefully we're not going to lose electricity, and hopefully it's not going to get too loud. So I'll try for once to be short and sweet, and then we can get on with our lives instead of sitting here in front of the camera for 20 minutes, and hopefully avoid the storm. So tonight, I wanted to talk about how do I know if homeschooling is right for me? Something that lots of parents wonder. Is this the right move for us? How do I know if we're a family that can do this? And there are definitely some factors that come into play that can help you decide if this is the right move or not. So the first thing I would say is, are you willing to go against the mainstream? That can be really, really hard for some people to do, particularly if they don't have their family supporting them. And I've already talked to a number of you who, your mom doesn't get it, your friends don't get it, your husband doesn't even get it yet. You're not even homeschooling yet because your husband's like, homeschooling, what the heck, right? So I would say first of all, you need to be willing to go against the mainstream. You need to be willing to do something that you may not see anybody else doing. You need to be willing to take a risk, to do something totally new, to step outside of what you are familiar with and comfortable with, and be willing to take an adventure that you maybe never even saw coming. I would also say you definitely have to have your husband on board with you. I would not, first of all, just for the sake of marital harmony, I would not make a decision that huge without your husband being on board. I can almost guarantee you that any issue your husband has, I would be able to talk him out of if you did our coaching thing. I shouldn't say talk him out of, I don't mean it that way. You know what I mean. I'd be able to explain, I'd be able to help him see how this actually works and why this would actually work, and help assuage some of those concerns and fears and worries that he has, and bust some of those myths. You guys have probably seen me a couple of times this week. I've mentioned the book the free ebook that we have, Busting the Homeschooling Myths. A lot of the things that dads often deal with are covered in that book. So if you want a copy of that, it is free. It is big. It's like it's 40 some odd pages, I think, or 50. And it's the top 10 myths about homeschooling. And we state the myth, and then we give you the facts and back that up with, in a lot of cases, with studies and research and stuff like that. So you can get that at goodschooling.net, just on the front page of our website there. I believe if you just start scrolling down a little bit, you'll see it. One of the next things is that you need to be willing to change your life, because while homeschooling definitely can come into line with pretty much anything that you're doing, it is going to add a totally different dynamic. So, particularly if you are a stay-at-home mom and you're used to having most of your day free, or it's maybe just you and your little one, if you still have, like preschoolers or toddlers or babies in the house, it is going to change the dynamic of your house. It's going to change your schedule. It's going to change your time. It's going to change what your energy output is like. And obviously, it's going to change your relationship with your child, hopefully for the better. And we'll talk about how that sometimes isn't the case in a minute. But you definitely have to be willing to let your life be changed. You have to hold everything with very open hands. You know what I mean? You need to be willing to see things shift and change and flux and flex and all these different things over the course of, especially your first year when everything is so new and you're still trying to kind of figure out your rhythm. And I'll go back to that other thing I mentioned just a minute ago. So this idea of your relationship with your child, you should not homeschool. Do not try to homeschool if you have a very contentious relationship with your child, unless your child is the one asking to homeschool, okay? if you have and I don't just mean, oh, my daughter and I are so much alike, we tend to butt heads. Yeah, I don't mean that. I mean, if it's very tense, very contentious, there's very, if your child just really, does not like you for whatever reason. And there are situations where it is like that. And it is not a judgment on you at all, because we all know teenagers, woo, hormone head, brains scattered, crazy. And so, if you're trying to force homeschooling on them, that is not going to go over well. And so if you are already struggling in your relationship with your child, I would recommend addressing that first and then thinking about homeschooling, because even if you are giving them lots of autonomy and lots of independence and letting them really kind of steer their own education, y'all are going to be in each other's space a lot more. And if the time that you spend together already doesn't go very well, adding more of that time, probably not a good idea. CelebrateCalm.com, I think, and PositiveParenting.com. I think those are both .coms. And I know I've mentioned them in previous videos before, and I'll try to find those links and put them back in on the comments on this. Those are great parenting websites. They do a lot of coaching. They have a lot of different programs. They've got just some, straight up resources you can just access without having to pay for anything. Really, really great stuff. But definitely get your relationship with your child figured out first. Another thing I would say is if you are not willing to make some sacrifices, and this kind of goes with that whole changing your life thing a little bit, sacrifices of your time, sacrifices of your personal space. Like if you're used to having the house to yourself, that's not going to happen anymore. Sacrifices of your energy, sacrifices of finances. You can do homeschooling incredibly cheaply. You really can. If that's something, if you're like, I have nothing, I have no money at all, but for whatever reason, I've got to homeschool my kid. Yes, you can do it. There are actual full curriculums that are free, that are online. I'm always a little dubious about the quality, but I do know some people that swear by them. And, you can always supplement, right? You can always kind of beef things up if you're looking and thinking, that English program's a little anemic. You can add in more, and honestly, a library card and an internet provider, if you have access to the internet and you have a library card, you would be shocked at the resources that you have available to you. And so yes, you can do a lot for free. However, you're going to find that there are things your child wants to do. And there are things that, to raise a healthy child, they need to have access to. If you live in an area where there are no other children and they never get to see other kids, they don't have to be surrounded by kids. We've talked about the whole socialization thing in the past, I think on another video, but briefly, no, they do not have to be surrounded by children all the time. However, they do need to be able to play with other kids every once in a while, right? And so if you're in this kind of situation, maybe you live in a really rural area and you don't really have neighbors because you're all on land, or you just live in an area where there just aren't any kids. The neighborhood that we lived in Colorado, it was like us. It was pretty much it. We were the only ones with kids, really. And so, you do need to come up with ways to get them involved with other kids so that they can have friends and so they can socialize with other kids, right? And so sometimes, depending on what resources are available in your area, hopefully you'd be able to find homeschool meetups and things like that. But particularly in states where homeschooling is extremely regulated and so there aren't as many families doing it, it might be harder to find those kind of things, which means you may need to spring for things like, sports through the park district or through your community center, or art classes through your community center, or, things like that where you're giving them the opportunity to get out with other people and meet new people and try new things. We don't want to wrap our kids in bubble wrap, right? We don't want them, they shouldn't be in the house 24/7, 365. They do need to get out and do stuff. And unfortunately, doing stuff often costs some money and it takes time, right? And it takes energy, like all these other things that we talked about before. So you need to be willing to make some sacrifices to give your kids the things that they need. And the other thing I would say is that you need to be willing to learn. If you are not a coachable person, and I don't just mean like you're not willing to do my course or something like that. I don't mean that. I mean you're not willing to learn new things and stretch yourself a little bit to figure out the best stuff for your kid. What's the best way that they learn? What curriculum is really going to click with them? What are the best resources in our community for them? And allowing yourself to learn from other people and to be guided by other veteran homeschoolers. And no, you don't have to go with everybody's opinion. You don't have to shift and change with every idea that comes your way. I don't mean that, but you need to be willing to hear input from other people and consider that and say, okay, I'll think about that, and say that sincerely. And particularly if someone's saying, hey, I'm kind of concerned about this, or something like that. I'm in a similar situation right now with somebody who's homeschooling, and I see that there are needs being unmet for their child. And there are a few of us who are kind of trying to figure out, how are we going to approach this mom? Because she hasn't always been very open in the past when we've tried to talk about other things that we've seen. So don't be that mom. Don't be that person who is not willing to hear what other people have to say. And, it doesn't mean that you have to believe everything that they say, but, if someone comes to you with a concern, or someone says, oh my gosh, I've observed your son doing XYZ. Man, you should think about putting him in this class or doing that, and your first thought might be, he wouldn't, that's not his thing. Maybe it is. Like, sometimes people see things in our kids that we don't because we're too close. You know what I mean? And so sometimes that outside input can really open our eyes to new ways of doing things, or new things that we can do with our kids, or whatever. But the point is, just don't be closed off. Don't be closed-minded. Don't be closed off. Don't totally, shun everything that anybody else has to say and say, no, I can figure it out myself. I'm sure you can figure it out yourself, but if other people can help you, why would you not want the help? You know what I mean? So really, most of it comes down to attitude. Notice I didn't say if you don't have any money, don't homeschool. You can homeschool and be dead broke. You notice that I didn't say if you live out in the middle of nowhere and there aren't other kids in your neighborhood, don't homeschool. Or there aren't any other homeschoolers, don't homeschool. All that material external stuff does not really matter in the end. Really, it has to do with your attitude and what you are willing to do, what you're willing to change, what you're willing to sacrifice, what your relationship is like, what you're willing to do to fix that relationship. And that can be really hard. My relationship with both my daughters kind of ebbs and flows in these different kinds of patterns. With one daughter, we're super, super similar, and sometimes that makes us butt heads. And with another, we are polar opposites, and so that makes us butt heads. And I have had to learn that I don't always see my girls the way they actually are, and that sometimes the issues we have are because of me and not because of them. Not because, oh, she's such a tween, and not because, oh, she's such a teen, but because I'm so controlling, or I'm so type A, or I'm so, whatever. I'm so married to my idea of how this should look that I'm not listening to what they're telling me. Because remember, what do I always say? All communication, or all behavior is communication. And so when I look at their behavior and I say, oh, she's totally mouthing off, or oh, yeah, sometimes it's teenager stuff. Sometimes it's just the only way that she has of reflecting to me how she's really feeling or what she's really experiencing. And sometimes that's the only way I hear her. So sometimes you have to be willing to admit that it's you that's the problem in the relationship. And you need to figure out how to fix you. And particularly as they get older, for those of us who are kind of control freaky and type A-ish, like I am, that can be really hard to start letting go of that and letting them steer their own course. And that's a whole other topic. And I'm going with my first teenager here, so I am no expert by any means whatsoever. But, you know, really, like I said, it comes down to our own willingness to change how we think, change how we function, change what we're willing to do, allowing ourselves to stretch, allowing ourselves to grow, allowing ourselves to be wrong, admitting that we are wrong, being willing to change. Those are the kinds of things that you need to be able to do if you want to homeschool. Doesn't matter if you have no money. Doesn't matter if you're a single mom or a single dad, or you work full time, or you don't have any family support, or there aren't any other homeschoolers in your area, or you're not a Christian. The homeschool world is pretty dominated by people who are religious in one way or another. And that can be really hard for people who are not religious or are the wrong religion. They're not the religion that all the other homeschoolers in their area are. But those things don't matter. Those things don't matter. And you need, okay, so Dawn, let's see, Dawn is saying, ooh, and it says Seymour. Said, I'm so unorganized, this is driving me nuts. Any advice? So, okay, so you need to be willing to do what Dawn is doing and admit, okay, these are things I seriously struggle with, and please help me. Be willing to ask for help, right? Organization can be super tricky. I am super organized with other people's stuff, not always super organized with my own stuff. My office right now is exceptionally clean for me, but for a solid year, you could not walk in this room because there was no carpet to walk on because it was completely covered with stuff. So I get you on the organizing thing. You need to do whatever works for you. And I know that's not particularly helpful, but one of the things that I realized was that, dawned on me too, one of the things I realized is that there's all these beautiful organizing systems, which are so gorgeous, and I wish that was me, but they take too much thinking. I do not have the time to ruminate about where things are going to go. I need to be able to dump and go. So like, I know people who have like these beautiful accordion files for like every subject, every child, or like for their taxes, every topic or every, line item in their budget or whatever. I dump everything in a box. And I think if I need to sort through it later, I'll do that. Like that, seriously, that's how I organize because it is the only thing that I can handle consistently. Otherwise, I get piles everywhere and I can't, it just builds up because it means I need to sit down and think through things. And I have a hard time doing that because I have so much going on. I don't like giving up that time. You know what I mean? So if you are super unorganized, yes, you can still homeschool. I've been doing it for 13 years and have never been good at organizing. So, when you go on to like some of these homeschooling Pinterest boards or like these homeschool mom blogs and they show like, this is our homeschool room and it's got like the tiny little cubbies and all of the cute little boxes and stored stuff. And I'm like, oh, it's beautiful and I would never be able to do it ever. So you do not have to be a Pinterest mom to homeschool. You don't even have to like Pinterest. You don't even have to be on Pinterest, okay? Don't compare yourself to other people. Like, you can homeschool because you are a parent. Like, seriously, that's what it comes down to. You have been teaching your child since the day they were born. You taught them how to talk. You taught them how to walk. You taught them their ABCs. You taught them how to get dressed. You probably taught them how to tie their shoes, how to ride a bike, how to, how to hold a spoon, okay? Like, you have taught them so many things. And just because now you're looking to teach them academic stuff does not mean you're suddenly not qualified, okay? You're qualified to homeschool because you're a parent. Full stop, end of story, period, okay? So really what it comes down to then is that technically anybody can homeschool. The only things that are going to hold you back are your attitude, okay? Now I will make one other caveat. The one other thing that can hold you back from homeschooling is your children, particularly older children, particularly children who have a very strong social connection at school. And that does not mean, I shouldn't have said it can hold you back. It doesn't mean you can't homeschool. But I will say there are certain personalities that you can say, I know that you really like school, but because of these issues, I'm not comfortable with you being there anymore, and we're going to homeschool. And they won't like it, but they're not going to kick and scream and put up a fuss. Or maybe they will for a little while, but then they're over it, right? There are other personalities who will not respond that way. And you need to know your child well enough to know, is this something I can push or not? Is this something that I am willing to, is this a hill I'm willing to die on? And when it comes down to things like, your child is being bullied, okay, well, they're probably going to be happy to get out of there, right? Chances are they're not going to be like, oh, Mom, don't pull me, if they're miserable every day at school. Kids who have learning struggles, learning disabilities, and know that they are so far behind their peers in school, or they struggle so much and everybody knows and I feel dumb and stuff like that. Like, they're probably going to be happy to get out of that, that environment also. But if it's things like, I don't like the influences that are around you at school, or I don't like the curriculum, or all these other things that your child's having a negative experience with, really, then it can be very difficult to convince them to leave that environment. If they have lots of friends, if they're very active in like sports or extracurriculars and things like that. So you have to tread carefully, and you have to decide, am I willing to force this issue and potentially create a lot of tension and drama with my child because I feel that strongly about homeschool? And you may say yes. I mean, it's your decision. It really is. This isn't me like subtly trying to tell you you shouldn't do it. This is a decision every parent has to make on their own. And you can't, compare to some other family and say, well, they, even though their kid didn't want to, they went ahead and did it anyway and it worked. Or they wanted to, but their kid didn't, and so they didn't, so I shouldn't either. Every child is different. Every parent is different. Every family is different. Every parent-child relationship is different. You need to do whatever you're feeling led to do. And you need to, I would say, you need to make it as palatable for your child as possible if they're not excited about homeschooling. You need to do what you can to give them the kinds of experiences that they want, or the kinds of things that they feel like they're going to miss out on, or as much autonomy as possible if that's what they really want. I mean, sometimes telling your child, you get to pick the curriculum. You get to decide what you're doing. You get to decide what classes you're going to take. You're going to have total independence on this. I'm going to let you take the reins. Oh, that's kind of, it's a very mature thing you're letting me do. Depending on the kid, that enough could be, or that alone could be enough to entice them, because they think, well, that's kind of cool. I get to do all this on my own. But really, it comes down to, it's a judgment call. That's really what it comes down to. It's a judgment call that you have to make. And I would say, just like everything else, like I said before, you have to hold things with very open hands. You need to realize that there might be a chance that you end up changing your mind later and saying, okay, we tried the homeschooling thing, and our relationship just, it was too much strain. And I value our relationship too much to keep putting it through this. Or maybe, maybe your child says, okay, I don't like this. Can we do this instead? And maybe it's something, you did not plan to do that. Maybe it's like a homeschool hybrid program. Maybe you were hoping to have more, kind of a hands-on thing with your kid than they want. You need to be, again, willing to hold it with an open hand and say, okay, it's their education, right? So if that's the way that they really want it, okay, I'll let that go. I can say we have never homeschooled the way I wanted to homeschool, ever, because it was not a good fit for my girls. It was not what they wanted. It was not something that suited their learning personalities. In the case of my younger daughter who has dyslexia, I wanted a very literature-based program, which you can do with children who are dyslexic, don't get me wrong. But she's super kinesthetic as well. And it took actually until this, last year, I think last year, or 2 years ago, sorry, 2 years ago, when I finally found a way, I figured out a way to do a literature program with a dyslexic child. And so I got to do it a little bit with her, a little bit with her sister. But there were other aspects of our homeschooling that still were not what I would have chosen. If I was the one who got to set all the rules and got to say, we're going to do everything like this and you're going to like it, then our homeschooling would have looked very different every single year that we've done it. But because it's their education, it's their experience, it's their lives, I had to let some of that stuff go and say, this isn't going to work for them. As much as I want to do it, it's not going to work for them. So again, attitude, right? It comes down to attitude. Are you willing to let things go that you really want to do for the sake of giving your children the homeschool experience that they want? Are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to sacrifice that dream that you had? Many of you have heard from my other videos. I started planning to homeschool when I was 22 years old. I was still in college. I wasn't even married. I wasn't even dating the guy that I ended up marrying. I didn't have kids, but I knew I was going to homeschool someday. And I didn't have my first until I was 28. So that was 6 years of thinking about homeschooling. And then, until I was 30. Until I was almost 30. So it was 8 years of planning. And then she was just born, and obviously you don't start homeschooling then. So it was all these years. It was like over 10 years of planning of what I wanted homeschooling to look like. And it never, ever looked that way. So I had to sacrifice that dream. I had to let that go. And it was really, really hard to do. I've had to make some other sacrifices that I did not want to make. We've had to spend money that I was like, oh my gosh, this is so expensive. I can't believe we're doing this. But it's what they needed and it's what they wanted. We've had to make some compromises. And I haven't always liked it. But at least I can look back and say, every year I did, to the best of my ability, everything I could to give my kids the homeschooling experience that they wanted. So in the end, I think that's the most important thing. You need to be able to look back and say that. And if you don't think that you're going to be willing to be that flexible, and sometimes sometimes the kids have to compromise too. I'm not saying they run the roost. I'm not saying you give them into every whim that they ever had. There's going to be times when kids want to do nothing but play video games all day. And occasionally, that's okay. But not like for a whole year, right? or not even for a semester. So yes, you can't give them everything that they want, but within reason. When I would sit them down at the beginning of every school year and say, what do you want homeschool to look like this year? What do you want to learn about? What do you want to study? Where do you want to go? What field trips do you want to do? What kind of classes do you want to take? Every year I've been able to look back and say, even though it meant sacrifice, even though it meant compromise, even though it meant letting go of things that I was hoping to do, I was able to give them the things that they wanted that allowed homeschooling to be something that they enjoyed. So, what was the original question? How do I know if homeschooling is right for me? You're a parent. Homeschooling is right for you. As long as you can make those sacrifices and you're willing to be flexible and change, and your children are willing to be homeschooled, then you can do it. Cool? Hope that was helpful. Certainly did not make a short video, did I? Sorry. I don't seem to be very good at that. All right. I hope you guys have a great evening, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye.